Who knows what he looks like? We could take some guesses. He could be the monster of our dreams. You changed the picture on me. I had a scarier looking one than that. But who knows what he looks like? I mean, we're not told. He could be the nightmare that we think. He could be a form of what he was created to be, or he could be a combination of all of it. We don't know what he looks like, but in the end, it doesn't matter, because 2 Corinthians 11:14 tells us that Satan can disguise, masquerade, or transform himself even into an angel of light. And we're going to talk about that specific truth more in detail a little bit later. But the fact is, if the enemy of our soul, this third part in the triad of the enemies of God, if Satan can transform himself into the exact antithesis of what he is, then we don't have a chance to know where he is, what he looks like, his presence around us. If he can trick, disguise, and deceive, even to the point of transforming himself into the thing we trust from heaven, then it doesn't really matter what he looks like. It's not his depiction before our eyes we need to worry about. It's his intention against our souls. You may remember I mentioned to you the name Carl I. Payne. Again, in his book, Spiritual Warfare, the best book I've ever read on the subject, he identifies these enemies of God this way: that the world around us, the world concept, the world thinking, the world is the external solicitation to our sin. In other words, Satan has created the world in such a way that he knows our selfish fallen nature. And so in the world, he has created little shiny things that get our attention and draw us to that. So the world is the external solicitation to get us to sin. The flesh is the internal solicitation. In other words, I don't have to have dangly, shiny, pretty things out in front of me. I'm driven to it. That's the flesh. The internal solicitation. Satan is then the supernatural solicitation to sin. So what does that involve? We've dealt with the first two, the world, the external solicitation, the flesh, the internal solicitation. But what we've not addressed is a very real potential in our lives. What we've not addressed is becoming targeted by the supernatural attack from Satan. So if we don't get caught up in the external world lures, and we have learned to be able to walk with God in such a way so that's not to allow the internal flesh to drive us in choices and attitudes, then there's the very likely chance that we will get intercepted from the supernatural realm. If I'm not grabbing things from the world, if I'm not driven by the flesh, then there may be a supernatural intervention leading us into sin. So, to get our heads around the enemy. Again, this third part of the triad of the enemies of God, world, flesh, and Satan, the supernatural solicitation to sin. In order to get our heads around it, we're going to hang this sermon, these truths, on two nails. The first nail is called the works of Satan. The second nail will be the wiles, W-I-L-E-S, the wiles of Satan. The works of Satan are more general. In 1 John 3, verses 7 through 8, and this is from the New King James, John writes, "Little children, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous, God is righteous. And he who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. And for this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil." Now, we find this phrase, the works of the devil. And in this passage, there are two spiritual truths that come through. Basic spiritual, fundamental spiritual truths. Truth number one is that this works of the devil is an insidious, comprehensive strategy of evil that Satan has enacted in this world. And the purpose is to keep mankind blind to the grace of God and to inflict as much torment, pain, and problem as they can to humankind. That is the works of Satan. An intentional strategy to create as much harm, suffering, pain, and to lead us away from God as is possible. The second truth we draw from that passage is that's why Jesus came. The salvation he brought us nullifies the works of the devil. Charles Stanley of First Baptist Church Atlanta fame said in his book, When the Enemy Strikes, he said, "A satanic attack is a deliberate, willful, intentional, and well-designed act intended to bring harm to a person in any way possible. Physical harm, mental harm, economic harm, relational harm, and spiritual harm." He then goes on to identify four objectives of Satan. Under the works of Satan, Stanley says he has four objectives. Number one is to draw us away from God. Number two is to thwart God's purpose and plan for our lives. Number three is to deny God the glory, honor, and praise due him when we live out godly lives of trust and faith. And number four is to destroy us, literally and eternally. The four purposes of Satan. I think Dr. Stanley covered those well. So what we see in the big picture is that Satan has created this intentional, purposeful plan, this strategy, and he's activated it into the world. And its purpose is to keep us from God, and in effect then to bring harm and pain and hurt into our lives. That is the works of Satan. But there's another term that the Bible uses about this strategy of the enemy, and it's found in the term wiles. W-I-L-E-S. In the wiles of Satan, we will learn more details. In the wiles, we will understand better his schemes and strategies. Ephesians 6:11 says, "Put on the armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." So again, two truths are drawn from this one passage. Point one, whatever Satan's plan is, whatever he has in the works, is branded wiles. And secondly, that these wiles, this wiles is so potent and can be so destructive in our lives that God has given us armor to deal with it. Spiritual armor to deal with spiritual attacks. The term wiles itself, the Greek term, is methodia. What do you hear in that? English. Methodia. Method. The wiles are Satan's method of getting into our lives. This term is defined this way: crafty, deceitful, cunning. Wiles is the term described as sneaky, devious, and underrated. In other words, wiles is a trap. It is the trap set, and will always be so. So in other words, Satan's works are the intent and purpose and goal of Satan's works is to keep us from knowing God, experiencing his fullness, and to bring as much pain to our lives as possible. His wiles, then, are the tactic plan to deceive us into thinking there is something better he's offering than God. One writer said, when Satan approaches us, he never comes dragging the chains that will enslave us. He comes offering us money, pleasure, popularity. He offers freedom and joy. In fact, he never hints about the promises, never hints about the consequences, only the promises he will fulfill the desires of our heart. How does Satan work? Well, the best story I could find to try to help us grasp this concept of the wiles of Satan, the deception, the lies, is a story I found about two young men, two Spanish con men, who were attempting to sell a counterfeit picture, a counterfeit portrait, to a rich Arab who was living in Switzerland. So these two Spanish con men made contact with this rich Arab, and the rich Arab sheik paid 1.7 million Swiss francs, or almost $2 million, for this supposed authentic painting. The sheik was incensed when he discovered that the painting was a fraud. The con men likewise were appalled when they discovered that the sheik had paid them in counterfeit Swiss notes. This story is called The Middleman because the middleman arranged everything. They paid him in real money to make this thing happen. He took off with the real money and then called the authorities on both of them. And they were picked up and taken to jail while the middleman took off in freedom. Doesn't that sound like what the enemy would do? Deception, wiles. Very quickly, I know I'm running over time. Very quickly, let me identify 5 wiles that Satan uses against us. Number 1 is the con man. He's a con man. That's where we at 2 Corinthians 11:14, where Satan is described as able to disguise himself as an angel of light. Think about this for a minute. This horrifies me. This truth about the enemy horrifies me. And the only one that horrifies me more is the very last one I'm going to tell you. But this is the reason this one horrifies me. We seek heaven. We seek answers from heaven. We seek those things that heaven gives. And when our mortal enemy is able to transform, disguise himself into what we identify with heaven, wouldn't you be open to listening to him? How many times has this happened? We hear about it all the time. Transforming himself. He's a con man. Number 2, he's a counterfeiter. And I'm just going to tell the story. Exodus 7, where God was leading Moses and using Moses in front of the Egyptian Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go. And so God gives Moses this staff, and when the Pharaoh demanded a miracle, and Moses threw down the staff and it became a snake, or Aaron threw down the snake, it became a snake. Well, the Pharaoh's Egyptians did the same thing. They were able to, in their magic, dark magic, imitate what was done by God. But in verses 11 and 12 of Exodus 7, the Pharaoh called in his own wise men, sorcerers. These Egyptian magicians did the same thing with their magic. They threw down their staffs and they became serpents. And then in 12b, Aaron's staff, Aaron's snake, swallowed up the others. Satan will counterfeit what is true and real, and he lies as a counterfeiter. Thirdly, he's a compromiser. And then let me go on to the last one. A compromiser. And finally, a corrupter and cheat. I'm sorry, one more. Here's the last one. He's a corrupter and a cheat. And finally, he's a condemner. I want you to listen. Don't miss this. Revelation 12:10. I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. I don't know how many times I've used this passage, preached this passage over the years, referred to this passage primarily, just look at it as a reference, kind of a branch off the main tree. But I studied this thing apparently in a way that I never have before, because I am shocked and appalled at what it says. I've always, when I've talked about the accuser of the brethren, I've always interpreted that as Satan accusing me of the shame and the doubt and the disgust and the defeats and the sin. He just piles it on. And I've always interpreted it that way. But I was wrong. Listen to what it says. The term accuser, the Greek is kate goreo. It speaks of a formal procedure. It speaks of something public and something known. It's made of two words. The primary term, identifies a place of public speaking, and the secondary term means to speak against. In other words, Satan's intent is to bring public humiliation and shame to you. Not just whisper in our ear accusing us, but to present us to the world and step out into the congregation and begin laughing at us, pointing at us, because he has ruined our lives. He has ruined our reputations. He has brought us down, and we stand in abject humiliation before the world. That's what he's saying. Not just a, psst, you're worthless, you're a loser. It's grabbing a microphone and standing in front of the largest crowd he can get and saying, "You loser, loser." Ruining our reputation. Giving the world the opportunity not just to mock and humiliate us, but to mock and ridicule our God. That's his intent.